So now we'll be moving on to the next presentation for the World Federalist Conference. It is a presentation on ICJ cases on the environment. So we have three speakers from the World's Youth for Climate Justice. We have Nicole Ponce, Mert Kumru, and Jule Schnakenberg. So Nicole is an environmental activist and human rights lawyer advocate from the Philippines. She recently completed her work for the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, the French National Center for Scientific Research, under the Normandy Chair for Peace in France as a research fellow engineer. Her primary focus is on the application of international law in areas such as climate justice, climate change law, international environmental law, human rights, peace and security, as well as the recognition of the rights of future generations. She is a founding member of the World's Youth for Climate Justice, a global youth-led campaign which aims to bring climate change and human rights to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. The World Youth for Climate Change, in solidarity with PISFCC, played an instrumental role in the historic unanimous adoption by the United Nations General Assembly of the ICJ advisory opinion on resolution on climate change on March 29th, 2023, at the UNGA headquarters in New York. During the American Society of International Law annual board meeting 2023 held in Washington, D.C., Nicole was selected as one of the new voices in international law by the organizing committee. She participated in a panel discussion on the theme, The Reach and Limits of International Courts and Tribunals in Resolving the Climate Crisis. Nicole is determined to use the law as a tool for social change, especially in the field of climate action and human rights. We also have two of her colleagues, Mert Kumru. He is a former UN Youth Representative, Human Rights and Security. He is also a campaigner for the World's Youth for Climate Justice, and he has an LLM student in Public International Law. We also have Jule Schnakenberg, who is a member of the core team of the World's Youth for Climate Justice and has an interest in using international law to further progress on climate justice and intergenerational equity. The World's Youth for Climate Justice, of course, is a great organization that we are proud to be partnering with, and we are proud to accommodate within the World Federalist Conference. Jule also is studying, by the way, sorry, for a master's in international human rights law at Oxford University. So again, without further ado, I will pass it on to you three.
Maybe I just thought, thank you so much. We weren't quite sure if the session was going to be moderated or not. So please do feel free to jump in if you'd like to, if the organizers would like us to kind of go in a specific direction. But maybe first, just a big thank you for inviting us, for having young people on this. And I think with kind of the diversity that we all kind of already, the three of us bring, we can show some of the incredible work that young people have done on climate change and human rights. And the international, I think, legal and civil society community have done on many different cases, really trying to bring together human rights and climate change. But yeah, I'll pass it maybe to my colleagues, and maybe Nicole, you can kick us off just to give the audience a bit more of an kind of an introduction to the case and the work we do.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jule. I'm just about to share my screen. Do you see my screen? Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, just to give a brief backgrounder on the work that we're doing, I'll quickly, give an update on what's been happening for the past few months. I think most of everyone here knows that on March 29, the UNGA at the United Nations General Assembly achieved a landmark consensus by adopting a resolution to request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on Climate Change. And this is significant because never before has the UNGA requested an ICJ advisory opinion through a resolution adopted by consensus. And this represents a significant diplomatic victory for the government of Vanuatu and also a great moment for multilateralism. And this unanimous agreement emphasizes the universal recognition among states regarding the seriousness of the climate crisis and the crucial role of multilateral cooperation in addressing it. So that's the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and also the permanent representative of Federated State of Micronesia, both recognizing and acknowledging the important role of youth on that day in bringing the historic UNGA vote. The meeting was organized, as you can see here, the meeting was organized by Ambassador Tevi of Vanuatu with WICJ and PIFCC youth. This was before the UNJ vote. There was high-level dinner reception organized by the government of Vanuatu and core group of countries. You have the Blue Ocean Law, who represents Vanuatu in the historic victory. So the reason why I'm showing this is because, and we're showing this because I guess it represents how the civil society campaign that first persuaded the Republic of Vanuatu and through their leadership, governments throughout the world has since its obsession been propelled and energized by students and young people. And the Prime Minister of Vanuatu described the upcoming ICJ as the young generation's call for justice to the world's highest court. So just a bit of a background on the journey. You have us here, young people from different parts of the world, from the Pacific, from Asia, and from Europe. It all started with the Pacific leadership and global solidarity, which was again led by the government of Vanuatu and then the core group of countries. So 27 law students in a classroom in Vanuatu started the Pacific Island Student Fighting Climate Change to bring the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court. And as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, Vanuatu has experienced cyclones of catastrophic proportions. So this propelled them to start the campaign for an advisory opinion before the International Court of Justice to finally clarify what are the duties and obligations of states in protecting the present and future generations. Just a bit of the structure, because now our movement is growing, our organization is growing, and we're very happy to share that. We have different fronts in Asia and Europe, Africa, the Pacific, Caribbean, Latin America as well. That's the steering committee and our members from different parts of the world. One of the things that we really wanted to emphasize in this presentation as well is meaningful participation of youth. So what is our goal? Our goal at the end of the day is to encourage states to submit written statements together with an annex containing the statements of those most impacted by climate change. So we have a youth climate justice handbook for that, which can be used as a tool to strengthen state arguments before the court and for crafting witness statements. And these witness statements are to be attached to state submissions that contain arguments centered on intergenerational equity and more broadly human rights. So these are basically just, it's an annex of lived realities of people from different parts of the world. Talking about and telling and sharing how the climate crisis has affected their lives. So this is the court, WICJ at the ICJ in bird's eye view, written proceedings, oral proceedings, and then the implementation. So the main objectives is really for the court phase is from youth to the courthouse, from courthouse to the streets, from case law to global impact, from momentum to movement, and then galvanizing global attention for climate justice and intergenerational equity. Now, what does this look like? So these are our members from the Asian front, handing out the Youth Climate Justice Handbook before the Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka on the left side, and then in the middle side, that's our youth representatives from Nepal handing out their petition before the Ministry of Law of Nepal. And here we have our members as well from the Latin America handing out a handbook to their ministry of environment. And of course, there you have our amazing Jula and Mert giving a copy to Professor Philip Sands during the ITLOS proceedings. And for now, I'll hand it over to Mert just to expound more on our global AO efforts and what are the main pillars for this ambitious global youth movement. Hi, Mert.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, I would say. And yes, so the pillars of WICJ, and it helps to explain in a bit more in depth how we as an organization operate and what our goals are for the upcoming ICJ advisory opinion on climate change and human rights. So let's start at the beginning. Pillar 1, the courtroom. When you look at the campaign, we've always said from day one that we need to make sure that the court, the International Court of Justice, is an institute, an instrument that has the power to influence and shape global policies. And it has always and still is seen as a very conservative bench and a very difficult institute to enter, especially as young people or especially as civil society organizations. So what we need to do is make sure that with our campaign, we want to amplify the voices of young people, and especially young people from the global south, to be present at the court when the hearings take place in The Hague. It is at one of our core principles from day one that it should be them that are heard at the court. And instead of seeing all of the fancy lawyers with their wigs, we want to hear the true stories that are so often unheard. And those that are living on the front lines of the climate crisis, those that face the brunt of the climate crisis right now, we want them to be center stage. So that's the courtroom phase. That's pillar 1. Then we look at pillar 2. We have national campaigns, and national campaigns basically revolve around advocating for global solidarity. And as you can see in the picture, this is mainly how our steering calls look like. It's young people from all over the world in different time zones updating each other on the fronts on what we've done in our specific countries or regions. And when we talk about national campaigns, we're trying to persuade our governments within the regions that we operate to submit a progressive submission to the International Court of Justice. Some of you already know, but every single country that's a part of the UN has a right to submit to the court regarding the ICJ advisory opinion on climate change. And we've created the Youth Climate Justice Handbook. Thank you, Alan, for sharing that in the comments as well. And with that Climate Justice Handbook, we're trying to create a legal basis for states to use in their arguments and to also explain why we're doing this work and for who exactly we're trying to make sure that this advisory opinion is as progressive as possible. Because an advisory opinion might not be legally binding for all states, like a contentious case. It still can influence the future of international climate policy making due to the importance that countries and the effort that countries put into it. So that's why having national campaigns with our amazing campaigners and our volunteers all over the world is so crucial, trying to get as much of our progressive arguments in those state submissions. And we can proudly say that it's looking very good and that we have a lot of success on this front, all due to our grassroots movements way of operating. And pillar 3 is exactly also how we try to get our civil society coalitions. And we therefore have a Friends of the Initiative system, which basically entails well, I wouldn't say high level, but it's also high level figures. But it's mainly people from the field of international law that have experience, that have endorsed us officially. So that's why we're trying to engage with them as well. For example, Mary Robinson and Cristiana Figueres and Dr. David Boyd have officially endorsed the campaign, and that's why we're proudly proudly showing that we as an alliance are an intergenerational movement. We do not only use young people, we are intergenerational from the core, and that's why it's good to show that as well and reflect it as well in our Friends of the Initiative. When we talk about the 4th pillar, we're trying to also get our academic conversation ongoing. And that's why we have some research writing and legal advocacy. So we attended Climate and Law Governance Day at COP26. We participated in writing our flagship legal report on human rights in front of the ICJ. And of course, we created our Youth Climate Justice Handbook. So we are also trying to act in the more academic way. We're not only advocating for climate justice, no, we're actively contributing to the legal framework in order to achieve climate justice. In that way, we're trying to be constructive in our advocacy work. Pillar 5 is my personal favorite. It's coalition building with stubborn optimists around the world. And you can see on the pictures in front of us that it started out at COP26 as a small youth reception, and in COP27 you see how much it has grown in just a couple of years. And that's exactly how this movement is growing every single day. It's young people from all over the world, from all corners of the world, that are trying to advocate for our ICJ advisory opinion and trying to advocate for a progressive interpretation of international law in order to protect our human rights and in order to prevent climate disasters from happening. And it's exactly this pillar which is so important for us, because capacity building and coalition building with optimists, with we call stubborn optimists, is at the core of our work, and especially at the core of the work of our front coordinators. So Nicole, for example, is our Asian front coordinator, and I'm the European front coordinator. And what we need to do is basically trying to get all of these people together and allow them to cultivate more and new contacts in order to spread the word as much as possible. And then of course, Pillar 6, telling stories of impact. Climate justice is at the heart of our message. And when we say that, we mean that. We're trying to let the world understand that our entire campaign is based around a sole principle. It's justice for all. And justice needs to be interpreted in such a way that we can see, finally, for the first time in the history of the court itself, that the consequences of the climate crisis are officially recognized, and that we as a global community can work together in order to make sure that the rights and that the futures of our friends and families in the global south are as much protected as for those who are more lucky in life. And that's why we also believe in telling those stories of impact. And we want to make sure that these stories are heard throughout the entire world, but especially within the chambers of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And we hope that we could all welcome you there at the end of this year, when finally the hearings will take place, hopefully. And now I would like to give the floor to one of my colleagues.
Hi, Jule.
Sorry, was that for me, Nicole?
Yes, are you ready
Yeah,
to
sorry.
take this one?
Yes, there was a little alarm outside, so I do want to turn on my microphone. Yeah. No, thanks, Nicole, for preparing the slides. I know we are rushing maybe through this for all the non-lawyers and
you
the
have
call.
quite a bit of time, actually. No worries, too. You have at least 20 minutes until we would have to start the Q&A, so no worries, no pressure for time.
Oh.
Thanks. Yeah, sorry, maybe more rushing through us, and I think we assume maybe kind of just a lot of knowledge from people knowing what advisory opinions are, and I see Alan is on the call, so this is usually, of course, I think everything we know from Alan, so this is usually where I would probably hand over to him, but I'll try, and I know he's carefully watching. Yeah, so the, yeah, as my colleague said, advisory opinions kind of can give advice to states on their international legal obligations. And the question currently, so it kind of has two elements to it. So it asks about the obligations that states have in relation to climate change. And then the second part of the question is, okay, what consequences or legal consequences could there be if states don't comply with these obligations that they have? And it mentions in both parts of the question, present and future generations, which kind of hints to the kind of a concept in the kind of the climate justice space, which is where the three of us are at home, to the concept of intergenerational equity. But that's, of course, not something that just the climate movement has invented, but the idea that there's kind of equity or justice between generations And we don't leave the world in a worse state than what it currently is. There's a precedent for this concept, and from the ICJ itself, or at least from judges who've mentioned it in the past in their dissenting opinions. A lot of courts around the world have recognized the principles of rights of future generations, and there's constitutions that recognize the rights of future generations. So what specifically the young people in this campaign have always been pushing for, and may I just say that at this point, there's a lot of people with a lot of toes, as a colleague said recently, a lot of toes are in the game. And there's a lot of people who are trying for this case to be something. But something that young people have always advocated for is that really would push for the future generations angle and the idea of intergenerational equity, because it's not new to international law. So yeah, I think, Nicole, I'm good to move to the next slide, but really just wanted to say that this is a key principle that young people have been kind of engaging on. So what specifically we're asking, well, so the handbook has kind of specific asks, but the handbook is also a resource for states that are often limited on capacity, and they might not have a mission in The Hague or an embassy. They might cover loads of different issues that might have never engaged with the ICJ. So we're hoping that with the handbook, we can provide them with the resource. But of course, we do have, as kind of young people who are supposed to speak on behalf of future generations and children, and kind of, really focusing on intergenerational equity. We are hoping, as Mert said, in our advocacy, that states will really include youth perspectives, and that can be in formal ways, that they annex a specific kind of youth submission. It can be that they meet individual youth organizations in the process of drafting and completing the written submission. It can be that they just have a meeting and kind of listen to the young campaigners. It can kind of be all sorts of kind of, there's lots of different ways to engage young people on this. Thanks, Nicole. And I can't see the slides anymore, but feel free to jump back in at any point. I think something in addition that Nicole and Mert and I had spoken about sharing with the audience today was also just, and I think we maybe should have started with that also, but I think you can't underscore the importance that this case has for the world, for frontline communities, for really, the majority world, for the global legal order, for the international climate policy. This is a hugely important case. And it comes at a very important and interesting time where the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea is also working on a climate change case. We're expecting it in late spring or early summer for it to come out. And the judges are going to look at what their colleagues in Hamburg, so that's the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, they sit in Hamburg, and they've also dealt with a question on state obligations in relation to climate change based on the Law of the Sea Convention. And so the judges in The Hague will look at what their colleagues in Hamburg have said. And interesting, in the same year, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights is also looking at a climate change advisory opinion, with the hearings expected to be this spring. We don't have dates yet or a place, but they're very interesting in format, that it allows civil society who've been able to submit something, allows civil society to also engage in the oral hearings and address the judges, which is not something that wasn't possible in the other two hearings. So and of course, the judges in The Hague are going to look at what the Inter-American Court have said. So a lot of regional international cases are coming before the judges in The Hague will look at it. And a lot of national cases are also being decided. The Orgente case in the Netherlands is a big one, the Neubauer case in Germany. But really there's a lot of countries where there's a climate change litigation case currently kind of at a different stage in the judicial process. So it is a hugely interesting time. For the law nerds in the room, we're happy to speak about it afterwards some more. But I think what's important, or what in our advocacy, what we always try to focus on is that these cases are not just, this isn't just law, but there has to be a connection to the people, civil society, young people, local communities, indigenous peoples, that the people see this as their court. And I think yeah, Ellen, the work that you and your colleagues did for the nuclear weapons advisory opinion, you showed us that it's possible that people, the people can be in the courtroom, the people will be outside of the courtroom, and nowadays that we can do live stream within seconds. We are just envisioning the world to really be watching the judges, and just for them to understand how hugely important this is for all of us, simply because we look at the international climate policy making space, and most recently in Dubai, for example, the big United Nations climate change negotiations took place in Dubai, and states couldn't agree on what they wanted to do. For example, on phasing out fossil fuels, which is, there's huge consensus that needs to happen very fast and equitable, and it has to be funded. And yet states weren't able to agree on this. So with the ICJ advisory opinion, we're hoping to have an additional tool in this fight, considering that the other process is so slow and simply not delivering. And so, this is, I think maybe the two takeaways from my short contribution should really be the importance of this case and at the time that it's coming. And then the second one is the call to action. Because, and thanks, Ellen, for sharing that, the deadline for states to submit is March 22nd. That's very soon. And if states have not, some states are done, they've completed their written submission. We kind of just informally hear this. There's no public register of this. Some states haven't started, some are in the middle of the drafting process. We're doing intense outreach, have assembled loads of civil society colleagues to try to get a few more states in these last crucial weeks to at least make a short submission saying that they accept the court jurisdiction, they accept the question, maybe align with another state's statement if they're not able to make their own submission, just with the limited amount of time that they have. But considering that this is, this hugely important, crucial case, we are just hoping that every state will demonstrate to the court that there's an interest, demonstrate state practice, an interest to the judges by the global community. And of course, we've always emphasized and focused on states from the global south, those who have most to gain from a progressive advisory opinion, that we want them to engage in that process. So if you do have any contacts, or if you're interested in supporting in these last 4 super important weeks, then please do reach out to us. There's loads of different ways, or speaking to the state directly, checking in with them whether they are planning to make submission, if not yet, to do so ASAP, or get in contact with, and of course we do not work for them, but with the government of Vanuatu, they've been doing incredible support for states who are interested in submitting. So I would politely direct towards them as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Jules. And just to, I'm pretty sure many know about this as well, but there are also advisory opinion requests before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and ITLAS, not just the ICJ, but these are complementary. And if Mert, if you could just share our efforts also, not just before the ICJ, but before ITLAS and before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let me just start with the ITLAS court, or the Tribunal Amasi, Tribunal de la Sea. So Jule and I were present at the hearings of the ITLAS case, the ITLAS advisory opinion, and this took place last year in September. We're expected to receive the outcomes of the advisory opinion later in a couple of months, actually. We'll hopefully see that this will form a basis for the judges of the International Court of Justice to understand and see how, for example, the interpretation of the UNCLOS Treaty is going to be crucial for the understanding on how, for example, maritime and marine life is interpreted by the international legal order. And from WICJ's perspective, it was interesting to participate with this advisory opinion proceeding, because we wanted to see and understand how, for example, young people are taken into account when it comes to, for example, being a part of the hearings themselves, but also being a part of the process. And what we saw there was on the one hand inspiring, but also on the other hand a little bit unsettling. So we were one of the few young people present there, which goes to show that our presence there was needed, and it felt like we were representing a large group of young people, while at the same time we couldn't represent everybody at the same time. We had the honor to see young people advocate for their islands. We had a wonderful speaker, Naima from Tuvalu. She's originally from Tuvalu, and she spoke there on behalf of AOSIS, the Alliance of Small Island States, that was the organization that basically brought forward this request to the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea. And what she said in those during her moment during the hearings was that she explained to the judges that it was for their families and for their people not only a case of climate justice, but it was also the fundamental basis of what their people's life has been up until now. That they wouldn't call a place home anymore due to the fact that our climate was changing so much. And I think that what we saw there was that when we go to the International Court of Justice, we need to have those stories present, and we need to share the stories of young people, especially, and reiterate the fact that it is those 15 judges in The Hague that will determine the future of so many cases, and will also basically lay the foundation for future litigation, perhaps, or future advocacy. So our work there was mainly to write down the oral statements and like to analyze the oral statements from the states, but also trying to create new alliances for our own advisory opinion. We reached out to several states that were present there and invited them to and handed them our Youth Climate Justice Handbook, invited them to also participate in the ICJ advisory opinion. We explained what the difference was between our advisory opinion and the ITLOS one, for example. And we also worked extensively on looking into how countries use their argumentations and how they form their argumentation. This was for us very crucial to understand, since that also will explain later on during our own advisory opinion on how to, for example, tackle arguments that, from our point of view, are not so valid. So it was a very good, I would say, a rehearsal in a way, to understand how an advisory opinion procedure takes place. And then when we talk about the Inter-American Court, it's actually very good to see that colleagues from our Latin American front are actively involved in this advisory opinion proceeding as well. And the timeline right now is I'm not very aware of the current timeline for the Inter-American Court, but the Inter-American Court on Human Rights is also going to discuss an advisory opinion on climate change. And we as WICJ have also wrote articles and have contributed to this proceeding because we see it as a sort of an addition to our own advisory opinion procedure. And that's, I think, very good to understand. We spoke to several judges on the bench as well in informal settings, and they said as well that they were also looking forward to seeing and understand what kind of arguments, sorry for the dogs outside, to seeing and understand what kind of arguments that other judges from the other tribunals and courts will make when they deliver their advisory opinions. So in a way, everybody's looking at each other, and we like to be in the middle of all of these cases, I would say, in order to understand them most and to become more aware on how we should formulate and how we should put forward our advocacy work. Because I think it's also good to understand that in the future, after we've received our advisory opinion, so to say, our work doesn't stop. And we still need to determine with our organization, with WICJ and the PISFCC, on how we want to continue. But if you ask, I think most of us, we're only just beginning, and we hopefully will receive an advisory opinion that is super progressive in its interpretation and which will set the basis for a future climate justice before 2030, if you ask me. Back to you, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent, Mert. Jules, if you have anything else to add as well, please. I know how much you've been supporting everyone, the efforts in different regions all across the organization. So please do share.
Yeah, no, sorry, maybe two small things to add. I think with the related to the Inter-American Court, we also, because civil society organizations can make can appeal, well, they were able to make written submissions and they'll be able to participate in the oral hearings. How do we get, young people, and maybe we had some law students who helped draft the brief? How do we build their capacity, their confidence, their skills, their knowledge to actually appear in the courtroom, which can be hugely intimidating, or in front of the judges? So we're doing some capacity building or planning, because we don't yet have the dates for the hearings. But yeah, preparing to do some coaching of these young people who will be appearing. And I think in general, thinking that kind of being that bridge between this hugely kind of secluded bubble of international law, bringing it to young people so that those who are studying see, oh, this actually does relate to me and it can be helpful to this kind of the small community that I call home. I think it's being that bridge builder is something that we're just, trying to do every day with the work that we do. And I just wanted to add, maybe to be a bit more specific, when Mert said a progressive opinion, and for the ITLAS advisor opinion, and for this one as well, and the Inter-American Court advisory opinion, the question is always on legal obligations and state obligations. And at ITLAS, what we've heard is that states have said all the legal obligations states have in relation to climate change originate from the Paris Agreement, because that's where, within the UN climate change kind of space, that's where the state said, okay, every few years we'll kind of see what we can reduce and what we can mitigate. And then on a voluntary basis, share that with everyone. And then that's how we should somehow get down to 1.5 degrees of warming, which of course I heard the horrifying news just I think last week that we've already exceeded this last year. So it's obviously not working. So states saying in Hamburg in front of the judges that the only obligations that states have is to every few years review of what they voluntarily might be able to do, and then continue even the very weak NDCs, the nationally determined contributions that they made, even then not performing those. That's dangerous. And so lawyers call this lex specialis. So that just means kind of the very specific law that applies is the Paris Agreement, the UN climate change regime. It's the only place where legal obligations are found, which is what states said in Hamburg to the judges, saying that way, as long as they engage in the process, that's it. That's really dangerous. And so what we're trying to push here and in front of the Inter-American Court is that no, states in fact have legal obligations in loads of different treaties and loads of different human rights conventions, and the two covenants, the kind of the human rights, like the big two kind of really big human rights conventions, but also the Convention on the Rights of the Child. There's so many places, and customary international law, where these legal obligations come from states. So you can't say, well, we go to COP once a year, and we every once in a while review our NDC that we aren't going to follow through with. That is not enough. And so a progressive opinion is for the judges to say, no, in environmental law and international human rights law, you have obligations to, for example, use the best available science, or the precautionary principle that you can't do something, if you know, and yeah, well, have to be maybe going a bit too much into detail, but kind of saying that there's loads of different places where states can sort, or where we can find the other obligations that also apply in the context of climate change. And so just wanted to kind of put a bit more color on the words of a progressive advisory opinion. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jules. Eric, I'm not sure if we still have time, or we can go to the Q&A.
It's 3 minutes where I'm happy to pivot to the Q&A. And if you have more to say, any concluding notes for the presentation you want to provide, please do.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if I just wanted to add on a bit. Thank you, Jule. Those were excellent presentations. I also wanted to emphasize the focus we give to the domestic and national context, and how we encourage our campaigners to participate or get involved in legislative or policy and different policy processes in their countries in terms of the ICJ is to make sure to contextualize it to what's happening in their country. So, for example, recently there was the clean air conference, and there were different. It was attended by different countries representatives in Asia, and one example there that we gave and we discussed was that for young people in Nepal, for example, when conversing with their governments and their representatives, maybe they could suggest or recommend that the brief or the submission of the Nepali government to the ICJ could involve the poor state of air quality in the country. So these are one of the ways that we could make sure that what's happening in the domestic setting or in the national level really gets amplified, and there's a clear picture of what's happening in different countries and states, and not just and not just principles, but really what's happening on the ground and how we can use these principles of international law to forward these, especially before the ICJ. And we're happy to discuss this further in the Q&A because I see that we have just a minute before that. So yeah, Erica, please.
Thank you so much for your presentation, for sharing all your thoughts. I also particularly like Pillar 5, as I think this is a group of, optimists when it comes to our international system and believing that we can deliver better. I am going to actually go to the chat for our first question. It comes from Alan Ware, which I'm pleased to know you're familiar with. What role can the UN Summit of the Future play in building momentum for the ICJ case? We can start with, why don't we start with Nicole, and we'll move counterclockwise.
Oh, yeah, great question, Alan. Thank you. Oof, very important, crucial. Probably one of the major activities we're planning on participating and we're preparing for in the months in the later on activities for the organization. It's very important because it discusses or will focus on one of the important principles, I would say, that we would really want to be included in the advisory opinion, which is the topic on intergenerational equity and the importance of future generations, which I believe will be discussed. And if I'm not mistaken, Jule, we were asked at some point to give out our a sort of a brief or statement on this as well. We were asked to contribute. See that they're smiling, so feel free to add on to that.
Yeah, I could briefly add to that as well. I think that the Summit of the Future has actually it comes at a pivotal moment in time, especially when we look at the 2030 agenda that the UN has set out. The Summit of the Future for us could mean that looking at, for example, the time in which it's going to take place, it's just before it's in the summer of this year. So then most states will also have received the comments from other states regarding their submissions at the ICJ, and I believe that it's very important for us to understand as a group of people in this call is that that common phase in which countries can comment on each other's submissions will actually determine how the orals are going to take place and going to look like. So our plea and our call during the Summit of the Future would, for example, then be allow for young people to be a part and to be taken into the process of creating drafts and submissions to the court, and make sure that during the hearing themselves, this once in a historic lifetime opportunity at the International Court of Justice for advisory opinion, make sure that it's an intergenerational submission. I always use the example, young people are the ones that are going to live the longest with the consequences of the decisions and the omissions that we either take or not take today. And it therefore only makes sense to include them in decision-making processes. And I think that for some of the future, our advocacy work would be most beneficial if we could allow for a broad consensus to exist that you can only have a statement when different different key groups within a society are consulted. And I think Nicole is working with, for example, Asian governments as well and Asian states on their submissions. We're in the European Fund are also doing the same thing with European states and with the European Commission, and we are hammering down on those points. So highlighting that, for example, during the Summit of the Future would be excellent to show that we are not only here as activists. Yes, we're activists, but we're also constructive. And I think that that's something that needs to be understood more broadly, that you can be activistic in your work and you should be proud to call yourself an activist when we're doing this work within the international law and sustainable field, so to say. So I think that that's one of the major things that we could achieve at the Summit of the Future. And let's hope that that our colleagues and our peers that are going to be present there also would like to take on this amazing task that lies before us. Thank you.
Jule, do you have any concluding thoughts? Want to share anything? Please feel free to.
Thanks, Erica. No, I was going to throw that question back right to the people who've asked it since they were working. They've been working on this for a long time, and we are small trying to cover loads. So, yeah, I don't think we've kind of intentionally engaged a lot on specific, the regional consultations or so that have happened beforehand. But because I think there's so many interlinkages between of how I understand from the perspective of an only half involved outsider, I think hugely important. But yeah, with definitely those who have been involved for a long time, thanks for sharing resources in the chat. And if you are allowed to come in, then yeah, please do feel free to share your insight. We're always happy for more advice and guidance on how you think we could or should engage. Thanks.
I want to keep it on this really significant submission that's coming up just in 4 weeks. What has the process been like trying to spread awareness and get other countries on board to put these submissions in? Please, Mert, you looked like you had some thoughts on this, so why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, actually, Erica, this is a great question. I can, for example, just share an insight that we just recently had this week, actually, in very interesting conversation I had with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. We have been working for a solid 3 years on lobbying to be included in their drafting process. And we can proudly say that we've been consulted several times right now with the draft submission for the Netherlands. And I remember having a couple of calls prepared with my peers from the Dutch Kingdom Islands. So we have islands in the Caribbean as well. And I said to them, I will not go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs without you guys being there with me. So we made sure that we had a time zone in which we had a time for the meeting in which they could also digitally participate, and we were all there. And to see, for example, how well prepared not only we were, but how well received our comments and our suggestions were taken into account by the government, and also were actually implemented in their submissions, really went to show that our work has not been for nothing. And also, we were actually surprised in seeing how progressive some elements were, as in we would never expect a Western country saying these things, but we saw them and we were surprised. And we were also happy to see that within governments, we also have some WYCJ campaigners somehow. So that's good to see. And I think sometimes, obviously, it can be more difficult. And I gotta say, those difficult states that are more that take more time to be convinced, for example, are also the challenging countries that we need to be consulting more and also have on board. Because yeah, if you look at the advisor opinion, it's going to be a broad group of countries, and not all of them are equally as determined to work on sustainable development. So therein lays the challenge for us, so to say, to allow for the most progressive interpretation of the advisor opinion. I hope that answers your question, kind of.
You're still on mute, Erica.
Jule, please, if you have thoughts to share, and then we can move to Nicole to conclude this question.
Oh, good. Nicole, go first. I was going to point to you anyways.
Thank you, Jules. Thank you, Erica. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Really has been so empowering. I don't think I'm at the liberty to share which countries just yet, but it's so empowering to see our members or volunteers actively or getting involved with their government, and their government in return asking them to participate and get involved in the actual and participate in the actual development of written submissions. So this for me, coming from a country from the global south is almost unheard of. Like a country where the government actively asking and seeking out young, uh, their youth practically to help develop an actual written submission before the ICJ. So that has been very empowering and also gives us the hope as well that it can be done. So we encourage our members, even if their country, yeah, there are we're not so good or don't have quite the track record to make good on environmental cases, but we encourage them to continue with the campaign anyway and make sure that their voices get heard and that they work with different civil society, and that it really does help to just get your voices out there, even if it's not as positive as you think it would be, because it can get intimidating reaching out to governments. But yeah, civil society has been very much empowered, especially in the recent years. And I see Alan's question there. It has been very helpful to talk, for example, about the ICJ nuclear case and how the court has ruled on some principles of environmental law in the ICJ. So that has also been very helpful, knowing that yeah, it is possible, and the ICJ can make decisions, or it can make a good decision on some important principles. Jules, if you have anything to add.
No, I don't think so. Thank you much.
All right, we'll move on to a question that I have, and it's really just being curious about some success stories or any case studies of ways that youth have been successfully involved, given a meaningful platform to share their perspective in environmental policy, whether at the international level or the domestic level that could be extrapolated to the international level.
Maybe I just start just to buy some time for the other two, because this is a huge question. No, thank you so much. And I think, we've at the United Nations climate change negotiations, a lot of young people, I think, are trying to grapple with that question. What are ways to engage youth? And I think that used to be the call, like young people need to be in the room. And now that a lot of young people are at the table, how do we, what is that? What's meaningful really, is having a youth event really a meaningful way to engage in climate policy making or environmental policy making. And so it is, a very timely question. I think first wanted to admit that I think, and I was invited to this panel where people were very critical about climate litigation as a way for young people to engage, because it's so costly, it's so difficult, it's really not inclusive or accessible. And they're like, okay, so what do you think? How can we make it more inclusive? It's like, I had not come prepared. I didn't see the questions before. And I still, this was 3 years ago, and I still am trying to think of ways how we can make climate litigation as a forum for meaningful youth engagement really kind of accessible maybe to more people. So far, the youth cases have always been supported by better funded, bigger NGOs. And maybe that is the way forward. I think if that engagement, that support, that advice, that counseling can happen on an eye-to-eye level. And I think our legal advisors, the people we are working with, who are mentoring us, advising us, have always met us eye-to-eye, kind of asking what we wanted to see and then helping us or help the young people that kind of in our network that we work with to find their own voice when they write a legal brief or so. So I think that there's definitely precedent for that happening, even if not super public. And I think otherwise, the work that Mert used to do in the Netherlands, I think that's just one way of doing that. Maybe you can share about the youth representative system, Mert?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, this was also shared in the bio. I used to be the United Nations Youth Representative on Human Rights and Security for the Netherlands, and together with my colleague Eva Fleming, which is also one of the core
Can
group
I
members.
interrupt briefly and
Oh,
ask, is this going to be the Fergus Watt Zoom?
That takes place at 3 p.m.
Okay, I'm sorry. Just so I'm in the right place. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's
Sorry
all
about that.
right. Sorry.
no worries.
Please continue.
Yes. So just to come back, so Eva Fleming, also one of the core group members of WICJ, was also UN youth representative, and that's how through that system we were actually sort of taken into the international processes of how, for example, diplomats would also operate, and that's where we met young people from the Pacific at a COP. Um, and that's how this entire organization actually grew out to become as big as it is nowadays. So it goes to show, as soon as you put trust and faith in young actors in the field, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're not asking or seeking for guidance from other generations. No, it's actually the opposite way. It's the opposite around. We're just asking to be trusted in a way that we can then also share and provide insights in such fashion that we can all cooperate on the long term and thus create something which is broadly recognized as an intergenerational initiative. And I think that that's the power in our advocacy work, is that we're not exclusive in like, we're not ageist, so to say. Yes, our organization is called World's Youth for Climate Justice, but as you can see with our Friends of the Initiative, we are open and including everyone. So in order to achieve a common world in which we all need to live, all generations in the long run. So yeah.
Nicole, any concluding thoughts on that question? All right. Yes, I believe the same Mary Robinson that you mentioned in your presentation is also the chair of the Climate Governance
Yes.
Commission, which we had present earlier. So a wonderful array of perspectives. I'm going to conclude with this question. Climate justice is a deeply intersectional issue. So have you collaborated with other global movements advocating for peace, democracy, human rights? I know you just mentioned that the nuclear case and that ruling by the ICJ stating that it had environmental implications is a really big win. I was wondering if any other collaboration efforts have been ongoing in this regard. Nicole, do you want to start us off? Or maybe you actually look like you might have something to share there. So please, here we go. Sorry about this. Go right ahead.
Thanks. Nicole, please feel free to go ahead. I rambled on earlier.
Definitely happy to share. Lots of, I would say, yeah, lots of collaboration actually. Thank you for pointing that out, Erica, because I know it's an advisory opinion on climate change, but really our lens is, and the nexus is really on human rights. So we're trying to be as inclusive as possible when you talk about climate change and how does it really affect people on the ground and human rights in general. So, for example, we work with different organizations that work on water pollution or air pollution. So these are basic human rights that need to be addressed and should be included in the narrative in the development of written submissions. And just last month, I've also worked with young professionals in Tokyo for the climate nuclear nexus, which is I believe is also a very important conversation because both pose existential threats and need to be discussed and addressed. And the one really significant way to address these global issues is to make sure that that we're not working in silos and our efforts are complementary. And I guess that's also the reason why we're here today, to make sure that, yeah, we get, we're involved in these conversations and we get to reach out and engage with different individuals from all over the world advocating for issues, very important issues like peace and security and human rights and of course climate change. So yeah, so the answer is just yes to that.
We have to move on to the next section in 3 minutes, but I want to invite Jule and Mert. Please feel free to offer your perspectives.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, just and thanks, Alan, for sharing that. So the Mega Alliance, which will be officially launched in almost exactly a month. That's just one way, I think, the ICJ, or making the ICJ more accessible to other people. I think that help to other people, to the people. I think, that's kind of one policy proposal, but that Mega Alliance has several other ones. And those are people who've worked historically more on social security, peace and security issues, maybe more governance issues and environmental policy or so. So yeah, definitely kind of collaborating there. We're working with the Human Rights and Climate Change Working Group under the United Nations, kind of in the climate change space. And there's a lot of organizations working on kind of against slavery, women's rights activists, children's rights activists, and kind of different, kind of advocacy organizations that all work on issues that see that these things interlink. And it's really kind of, I think just organizations have really understood that we have to work together. And the alliance that is formed on the ICJ, specifically on them, has 1,500 members. So there's so many organizations that definitely understand that whatever they are working on, a progressive advisory opinion, is likely going to affect that. So we think of like a big house, a big roof that everyone can fit under, and then push for the same. Thanks.
Thanks, Jule. Mert, I'm just going to give you an opportunity if there's anything concluding. Otherwise, we'll move on.
I think the best things have already been said by my colleagues. Thank you so much.
Then thank you so much for your presentations, for taking the time to speak with our organizations. And you do so much interrelated work with, Alan Ware is in the chat here mentioning all the different ways we collaborate already. And I hope that we can support you in any way to get as many people in nations doing this submission. So let us know what we can do on our end. But otherwise, have a wonderful day, and thank you for the questions in the chat.
Thank you again. So we'll be moving on to the next segment